Buenos dias, Gunners Collective TV. Back at it. You already know. Like a torta with some bad habits. Bye. Bye. Let's get straight to this intro. Welcome back to the channel, and if you haven't already hit that like and subscribe button, make sure you go ahead and do that. Put your notification bell on all so that way you're directed in the direction of the dope content that I stay kicking, and I appreciate the support, man. I'm very humbled by it. So I got asked a question, and the question was easy and simple and straightforward, and it was easy to give an answer to, so I'll give the answer right here in detail. And the question was, is there any group that goes against everybody on the California prison yards? One group that defies the odds, that stands tall against everybody? Well, it's a two-part answer, because every group, blacks, whites, north, south, bulldogs, usos, others, paisas, every group will stand against anybody at any time if there's disrespect to be had in, right? So if one group is disrespected by every group, let's go. And I mean, it's not going to be an easy task. It's going to be war, right? It's going to be battle after battle. Every time there's an unlock, you're going to get rushed or you have to get off where you're mad at. And until you've been put in that position, you'll never get a grip and understanding, right, of what that really is, to be green lighted basically by everybody on the yard, or to have a green light on everyone on the yard, meaning that you have to get off. Either they're going to get off on you or you're going to get off on them, but somebody's getting off. What does getting off mean? Well, you should know by watching my channel now. It means fighting, right? And so many other things. But there's one group that stands out amongst the rest when it comes to being the adversary of everybody. And I know a lot of people like to say that this group is allied with the Norteños and that they have an alliance, and that every time something kicks off or happens, they join together to fight a common enemy. And I can tell you that's a myth, a lie, and not true. Very untrue, right? And the group I'm talking about are the brothers, the blacks, the African Americans, whatever title you want to give the brothers, right? The Africanos, the Morenos, right? There's a lot of different names. And then there's derogatory names that people say, which we don't, fuck with on this channel like that. But I've always had a lot of respect for the blacks on the California prison yards. And I know some people like to throw out these myths and these I guess stories that the blacks' politics are weaker than the Mexicans and the whites, that the blacks don't check their own, or they condone certain people with bad cases and bad ways to function on the yards amongst them. Look, there's been flaws in every group, right? Do the brothers allow SA offenders and people with bad paperwork to function on their yards? Perhaps there's situations where that happens, but the black man as a whole on the California prison yards stands strong and are ready to get off, whether they're Crips, Bloods, Kumi, Jama, Muslims, non-affiliates. They're ready to fight everybody and anybody because they consider everybody an enemy. And why is that? Because most people on that yard, every other group, whether it's north, south, white, consider the blacks an enemy. I'll tell you guys some stories, but I'll make it easy. When it comes to the Southerners, there's no love lost on the California prison yards between Southerners and blacks. They've probably had the most run-ins, the most melees, most riots amongst those two groups, right? And I'll say this. One thing that always stood out to me when I watched from a distance was when the Southerners had issues with, say, the Crips or the Bloods, right? They didn't just get off on the Crips or the Bloods. They got off on anything black moving, right? And why was that? Why did it seem like a racial thing? Like anyone with the pigmentation of black skin or dark brown skin was going to be ran up on based upon a disrespect or a disagreement with another group. Because you have Crips and you have Bloods, and there's separation there. They're all black. They're black men. And when it becomes a racial thing, they're going to stand together. Absolutely. But their politics differ. They're much different. the Damus, the Crips, they don't follow under the same rule of thumb. They got different rules and regulations. They're more of a street. They have the street gang mentality, but they don't. They may function and talk to each other on the yard and play basketball and do all these other sorts of things that they do. Play some spades, some dominoes, shoot some conversation. But when it comes crunch time, when it involves politics and gangs, they differ on a whole lot of aspects, right? But if they get into it with the Southsiders, say the Bloods get into it with the Southerners, then the Southerners are going to get off on anything black moving. And that's just how it's always been. And you would have to ask a Sureño or a Southsider why that is, right? And I think just from my personal experience and seeing it, I don't think they want to take the time to differentiate who's who and what's what. They figure at that point, anything black is the enemy. And so that right there makes the brothers have to go against all Southerners, even brothers that are not involved in the disrespect or involved in the disrespect towards them. Now, as far as the Norteños, the Northerners do function on the same side of the yards as the blacks, right? But that doesn't mean they always get along. See, one thing I learned about prison a long time ago is the less interaction you have with the group, the less drama you're going to have, right? If the Southsiders and the whites and the natives are functioning and the Paisas are on one side of the yard and you have the Usos, the others, the blacks and the Northerners on another side of the yard, there's going to be less conflict between North and South, North and white, and vice versa, and all the other groups that are on the other side of the yard because you have less interaction with them. And usually when it becomes a disrespectful thing or a discrepancy between groups on the opposite side of the yard, it's usually too late to converse about it. It's usually go time, right? And everyone that's involved is going to get involved or you're going to get involved in. And that's just how that is, right? Or involved on. I could tell you about several incidences between blacks and Northerners, which was unfortunate because a lot of these guys, man, I used to talk to every day, play spades with. A lot of them were my spades partners, chop it up with. And to say there was a loose alliance, no. They did not like the Southerners as much as we did, right? They didn't care for the Woods brother as much as we didn't. They had an understanding with us that, we had common enemies, but that didn't mean that their bullshit was going to become our bullshit and vice versa. Never that. Norteños stood alone and the Crips and the Bloods and all them stood alone when it came to that. So no, there wasn't an automatic, hey, we go, you go. Red light, green light. There wasn't an automatic that between blacks and Northerners. And in fact, I seen a lot of incidences and was involved in a few between blacks and Northerners, right? And it was unfortunate because, a lot of people seem to believe, and I just seen it on No Jumper the other day where Adam was interviewing, what's his name? Swamp Stories, right? Allegedly Swamp Stories. And they were talking about Norteños and Southsiders. And Adam seemed to say that he vibes more with Norteños for whatever reason, their swag, their vibe, and was kind of, I don't know if he was being disrespectful towards the Southsiders, but I felt as much love as the Southsiders have shown him and allowed him to function right there in LA and have come onto his podcast and showed nothing but respect. I thought he should treat their title with a little bit more respect, but he seems to like the Northerners more from what I get. And Swamp Stories agreed that Northerners had a little bit of a different swag, that he felt that the Northern Mexicano culture was more ingrained and invested with the African-American culture, the black culture. And I'll say this, in Northern California, man, Norteños have always had swag. There's always been a vibe, a different type of vibe. But as far as adapting the black culture, you will see that in some areas like Sacramento, some areas like the Bay Area. The Central Valley was a little bit more different. There was more warfare between blacks and Mexicans for whatever reasons. A lot of them were personal and then became more on a professional tip. But it is what it is, right? As far as, the blacks, they're willing to take up arms and go against every group because they're the most hated. And that's the truth. You already know about the Woods and the blacks. They're common enemies, meaning they go into prison considered enemies. And that's just the black and the white thing that carries over from the streets, from the racial identity of people to going to prison. And then all of a sudden, they're adversaries, right? You'll see very rarely, maybe 1 out of a million times, black and white issues. It's very rare. They do not talk to each other. They don't fraternize. They're not bosom buddies. They're not perfect strangers. They're not any of that. Them two groups, man, keep their distance because there's already a hatred on both sides for each other. And yes, it goes both ways. I'm not going to sit here and say the blacks are hated on by everybody because they wear their hatred on their sleeve as well in the California prison system. When a group is hated by everyone, which they pretty much are, I'm not going to say the Norteños hated the blacks, but they didn't get along with them as much as you would think or as much as gets put out there, right? The Southsiders, yes, man. I know there's a lot of people that say, oh, the Southsiders never hated blacks. Look, man, I've done time around Southsiders for a long, long time. And I'm going to tell you, man, there's a very few Southsiders in the California prison system that fuck with the brothers, man. They might chop it up with them here and there. They might give them a good morning or a goodbye. But anytime there's any type of incident that involves blacks and Southerners, the Southerners are full go and ready to go all the time. It's like they can't wait. You know, it's like they've adopted that can't wait mentality. Like, man, they can't wait to get off on a black, right? And the blacks feel the same way about Southsiders. There's no love lost because of all the blood that's been spilt and all the warfare that's and the, you know, things that have been shed in prison. You know, I respect the blacks personally, right? You know, have I took up arms against them? Absolutely. I'd be a liar if I said I didn't. Have they cracked me one time in the face, man? Bam, a few times, right? Have I cracked back? Yes, sir, right? But I'll say this, right? The brothers, man, are a strong group because they are the only group that goes against everybody. Now, I know people are like, what about the Bulldogs? Well, the Bulldogs go against North and South, but they don't necessarily go against every group all the time. They could function on the yard with blacks and whites and be cool and have no problems, right? But the blacks are pretty much hated by everyone. And why is that? They have the numbers. You know, the average numbers on a prison yard is going to be about 500 brothers. Now, imagine they're different groups, right? But they're about 500 strong. And then, of course, you've got the Southerners are usually 150 to 200. Northerners about 20 to 30. Bulldogs have their own segregated yards, so they don't function on the GP yards with North and South. Then you got Woods, about 60 to 100 of them, if they're lucky, right? And then others and Paisas and natives and whoever else, right? So the blacks are always the deepest on the yard, regardless of what anyone says, what other content creators put out fucking bullshit. They are the deepest on the yard, but they don't all roll together unless it becomes a racial thing. And like I said, when it comes to the Southsiders and blacks, it's always a racial thing because they choose to go at it with all blacks, not just one group. So let me tell you guys a little story. I was doing time on a yard, right? And everybody was pretty cool. There was North, there was South, blacks, whites, a little bit of everybody. And everybody was minding their own business. The yard was pretty smooth. Everyone was just trying to do their time, get their little packages, their little commissary, you know, eat their little ice cream on the yard, a little soda. And those are lovely yards. There's business being conducted behind the scenes. Visits are flowing. Packages are going. You know what I'm saying? Courage is growing. But what happens is one bad apple can spoil the whole damn bunch, right? So one person could fuck it up. So there was a shoe kick out. And he was a black dude that allegedly was associated with the BGF. Okay? Wasn't a made member, wasn't part of that group, but was in close association. Now, because of that, he wasn't validated, nor was he was being looked at. And there was people on the yards whispering about him, right? Now, most of those guys would get validated if they were validated BGF and locked up back then in an indeterminate shoe, and that was that, right? They wouldn't see the light of day until the end of hostility shit happened. But back then, there was dudes that, you know, were in correspondence with people, and you can get validated just for allegedly being associated, but they were looking at this dude for validation points. I noticed back in the days, man, and I'm gonna keep it real, even though the blacks were the deepest group, they were the group that was the getting validated the least. Okay? Not to say that some of them didn't get validated, but because their groups weren't, only one group was considered an actual prison gang, one of the big four, the other groups weren't. They were just disruptive groups. They weren't getting validated like that as much as North, South, Bulldogs, and shit like that, right? So whites. So this dude gets on the yard, and you could tell automatically there's an issue because the Southerners are looking at him like he's a target. The whites are looking at him like he's a trophy. They're foaming at the mouth, brother, let's get this motherfucker, brother, right? But they didn't say motherfucker. They said some other word. And then the Norteños are like, fuck, bro. this right here can create fucking an air of controversy because these guys, this guy's going to come function on our side of the yard. It could just get ugly, right? And the last thing the Norteños want, man, I don't care what they say, is look, they're ready for all static. They're ready for all funk. They don't want attention, especially with what little they got going on. The least thing they want is attention, right? They just want to function under the radar, do their time. And then when it comes time to go, let's go. And they're so busy politicking on each other and removing each other, they don't really have the time to focus on any other group. You'll notice that about the Norteños in the California prison system. They're so deep into politicking on each other and themselves, holding their own accountable, cleaning up their yards, that they don't really have time to go at it with other groups. They have so much, probably the least interaction with other groups than anybody. They work out alone. They do their thing alone, just is what it is. The brothers, man, they're outspoken. They do their thing on the yard. They're not fearing anyone, right? That's one thing about the blacks I respected. You know, they're not fearing anyone. There are incidences, isolated incidences where I've seen blacks break it down. They didn't want no smoke. I've seen Southerners, Northerners break it down. They didn't want no smoke. That's just the truth, right? I'd be a bullshitter and a liar if I'm fucking going to lie to you guys about that. But anyways, this dude gets on the yard. And I could just tell, oh, man, there's drama. And so what had happened at that particular situation was the brothers, man, they were on this dude. Like you could tell this dude, it wasn't that he was a somebody because he was a little skinny younger cat, right? It was who he was sold up or who he was next to in the shoe. He was getting the philosophies and indoctrinated by some of the BGF plights, right? Some of their idealisms, their ideas. And for those of you that don't know, the Black Guerrilla Family, BGF, man, considered one of the big four in California now, has minimal numbers and isn't the biggest threat as it used to be, but still holds weight as a name, as a title in the California prison system, but isn't as large of a group as it once was, right? They were more political, right? Anti-government, anti all that when they first were created. And of course, they were created for the self-protection of the black man. And that's just the truth, right? And they were willing to take up arms and go against any other group, you know, that posed a threat to their peoples. So I respect it. It was started out as a good cause, but just like every other thing, man, few bad apples spoil the whole damn bunch. So this dude gets on the yard. He's creating chaos. You could tell, right? Just by him being there. And this was one of the only times that I've seen whites and blacks get off. What happened was one of the white, I guess, shot callers is the words they use, right? Got at one of the brothers, man, and was like, hey, is that dude, this dude? Like, they weren't too sure. And the blacks got mad that the whites would even ask about him, which they have every right. You don't ask about another race. You don't ask about another prison group at all, right? They got a little upset and there was words exchanged. And it wasn't like go back to the dorm, get a knife, plan, prepare, go back to your building, go back to your cell. There was none of that. When it becomes a black and a white issue, it's a right then and there issue. They don't need to go ask anybody, hey, can I get off? They're already worse enemies on the yard. Probably blacks and whites are considered the worst, but they're the ones that have the least amount of problems. It's a trip, huh? The white dude took flight right there. Boom. And it just cracked off, right? And you guys want to know something? I'm right there by the tables, right? I'm chilling with the homie. I'm playing spades on the table. We're tripping out. They're getting off. Boom, boom, yard down. All the blacks, all of them that I seen took off running towards the whites to get off, right? That dude that just got out of the shoe, he laid it out. He was right there next to me, laid it out. I just looked over at him and shook my head like, damn. All this was over him, and he didn't perform up to par, right? I was like, wow. A lot of dudes went to the hole. There was a couple stabbings. White dudes pulled out pieces. A black dude pulled out a piece. And it is what it is. So for those of you guys that want to know the only group that goes against everybody all the time, and that's the blacks, man, and that's the truth. And they hold their own. They hold their own, man. Don't believe the hype. Don't believe the bullshit that they're scared of Mexicans with knives and that they're this and that they're that. That's untrue, man. You have individuals that are scary, yes, in every group. And yes, there are some black dudes that don't want no smoke whatsoever. But as a whole, as a group, the blacks in prison, man, they go against everybody, anytime, any place. So that's just my take on it. With that being said, thumbs up or thumbs down. Heavy's going to be the head that wears the crown. I'm going to continue to strive, struggle, and strive for what I truly and honestly believe in. And that's the betterment of all people. This video right here is sponsored by Barrio Liquors in Turlock, California. If you're ever in the Turlock area, the Central Valley, pull up to Barrio Liquors, get you something cold to drink. Also by Sticks and Stones Yard Service in Tucson, Arizona. If you just moved to the Tucson area or you live in the Tucson area and you need an estimate on some yard work, Make sure you Google Sticks and Stones Yard Service. Let's support our small local raza businesses. Bang, bang. This is the gun.